it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, your mind will probably be thinking, oh, I need to have it an absolutely perfect line. Well, if it doesn't work out that way,
enjoy this for the
that's
process.
Okay. You know, the point of this is
the
just to
final
give
result.
yourself a little bit of a break and
enjoy this for the fun process and not so much the final result. Hey everybody, it's Tanya here. Welcome to my channel, and today we are going to be doing a watercolor painting based on a photograph that I took on the beach near me on Vancouver Island. And here it is. You can also grab this picture from the description area or the community tab. Now you can see that there's a lot of beautiful colors and a silhouette, and this makes it fun to do in watercolor with a lot of layers. But feel free to use whatever art supplies you have on hand. Now I've actually shot this over a 5-day period, but you don't have to take that long. You can actually grab a hairdryer and dry your layers in between. And the fun thing with watercolor is that the more layers that you do, the more vibrant the color. So all I've done to start is I've got a watercolor pad. This is a really reasonable one. You can get this online for a really decent price, and it's got a nice texture. And I've just drawn in some figures and then just a line for the horizon and some mountains. And that's it. It's really simple. And from here, we're just going to start with all things watercolor, the lightest to the darkest. And so we're going to just start with a couple washes. And because I don't want this to be a 2-hour video, I'm actually going to speed it up a bit. But feel free to jump to different chapters or to just pause the video and paint along. Okay, here we go. So the first thing to know is when you're doing watercolors, you always want to start with the lightest color first and then build into that. So I'm starting with the light creamy color here, and feel free to use something a little different if you like, whatever suits your fancy. Now, the reason we start light and go to dark is for a few reasons. The first is because watercolor is really great when you start to do layers. You get vibrancy and depth, and it allows you to have a lot more control on what you see as a final product. Second reason is the colors dry a little bit darker, and sometimes they'll dry a little bit different than you were expecting when you start to layer. So you want to go from the lightest to the darkest. And the third reason, which is the most important, is if you have a dark color and you put layers over top or washes beside it, the colors will bleed, especially when you have paper that's got a bit of a texture and it's quite porous, and the colors will bleed into each other. So in this case, we've got a light background with a black or a dark purple silhouette, and so we want to do that at the very end. Okay, so I'm just going to speed this up, and again, feel free to hit the pause button or just enjoy the process. Now, as I move into the section below, you can see that I'm actually wetting the page first, and I'm doing this so that I can add the pigment to it and get more of a sheer result, because I'm not putting pigment directly out of the pan, but also because it's a larger surface area, it allows me to have that area wet and then add to it. So I'm not worrying about things drying and getting a line. Up in the top, I wanted that line at the very top because it's defining the edge of the painting, but also because the sky will be going a little bit darker at the top, so it's like a guideline for me. So this part I wanted to do it a bit wet, and then I will add some paint and pigment into it. Now I'm taking a sheer wash of orange and just starting to block out areas where we have that definition between the waves. So you can see that there's the blue that comes through in the source photo. And so this is just giving myself a guideline. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just blocking things up and slowly beginning to build up the color. Now I'm going to flip it upside down, and we're sort of doing the same thing, blocking it in the sky. Now if you get a hard edge like I've got here, you can simply take a dry brush or the brush that you've got and just dry it off a bit and then go over that edge, and it'll just give it a nice soft effect. Now you can see I'm starting to do the same thing by adding a little bit of blue and then a very sheer wash of plum. And this will dry in a very sort of soft gray color with a bit of a purple undertone. And so that is really the basic steps. And again, we're just blocking in the clouds here and very slowly using sheer washes of color to build up. And then, we will eventually be letting them dry in between. Okay, so here we are on the bottom, same thing. Now starting to block in with that sheer wash of color again, just the different lines which represent the waves on the water. Starting to add in the blue of the different areas that have more of a blue cast. And again, slowly building up sheer washes of color. Okay, this is a fun technique to share. So you get a little bit of water, and what we're doing is we're just wetting the page down so that when we put some paint on, it's going to do a beautiful dispersion of color, almost like an ombre effect with almost no effort. It's very, very easy. And so I'm just blocking out some of the areas that I want to be wet, and I'm going to go in with a nice, deeply pigmented orange and slightly dab it right at the edge of the mountains and hills, and you'll see that the orange begins to spread out all on its own, and it's a lovely effect which we can use to make a really bright sunset. There we go. Beautiful. And so this is a lot of fun, and you can use a very small amount of paint, and the trick here is to put a small amount and then just let it do its thing instead of pushing into it and fussing around with it. So just dab it in, let it spread out, and then you're going to begin to get that wonderful feeling of the saturated orange of the sunset here. Oh yeah, I also wanted to point out that when you get down to the edge here, now this might not be exact like in the photo, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. But you can see I've left this sort of a horizontal line that's white with a bit of yellow in it. And the reason that we're doing that is to create the illusion of the bright light at the sunset. So when you're putting the color washes in, you want to make sure that you don't lose the white, because that is what will visually make your eye think you're looking at the sun. So especially on the left side, you can see where the white is, and there's a little bit left to fill in on the top of the ridge, right about there. And again, doesn't have to be perfect. You can kind of use your own discretion at what you think looks good. Okay, so let's just keep adding some more paint down. Now, while the paper is still wet, we can go back in with even more of that right out of the pan, out of the tube, bright orange, and add it in, and it's still going to give us that wonderful dispersion of color. And here we are creating it right on the edge of the hill, just like before. And you can see it's much stronger now, right? And that's because the layers are starting to build up. And so allowing that to just do its thing and just getting into those little edges is what gives that wonderful illusion of the sunset. Now I'm going to do the same sort of thing below, and you can see that I've sort of left an area through the center that's a little bit lighter, and that's almost because it's a reflection of the light into the water going down. And so I'm just going to start adding a little bit more color and starting to add just some horizontal lines that are going to mimic all of the different waves that are happening. And that's sort of the process that will be continuing for the next little while. Right, now things have dried up a little bit, and I'm going in with a bit of a darker wash and starting to block in the lines of the waves. And you see how I just blotted that out there? Sometimes if you don't like it, just grab some Kleenex or paper towel and blot that right off. It'll still leave some pigment, but it won't be as strong. But don't forget, this is all intuitive, really. We're just using the photo as a guide. If you want to have it a different color or a different shape, that's totally up to you. So don't worry about it. It's not about being perfect. It's about being perfectly imperfect, which means you get to make mistakes, which is the wonderful thing about doing this kind of work. So the process from now on is really just going in, adding layers, adding in some horizontal lines to mimic the waves, the wind on the water, and slowly building it up with washes of color. And we are really just using the three basic colors here. We've got the orange. Sometimes I'll add a little bit more red or yellow to it if I want a bit more variety in the area, or adding that nice light blue color, which gives us sort of the gray. So orange and blue will make muddy gray, and we were actually going to use that to our advantage in different areas where it's a little bit darker. So put some layers down, let it dry, put some more layers down. Now we're going to build up that wonderful, moody atmosphere of the dusk when the sun is going down and the sky is starting to get purple or dark blue, and we're just going to add a wash of this plum. Now remember what I said about the orange and the blue creating sort of a brown? Well, the same thing with the plum and the orange, because they're oppositional colors. So the plum and the orange together are going to create sort of a beautiful gray, but with that plum and blue undertone, because we had put down a layer of blue previously, so it starts to show up underneath. Now again, I'm blocking in those clouds, just putting some edges to give myself a visual reminder. If I put the line in too hard, like I have here, I'm going to go in with a brush that has been wet and then squished off, dried off, and you can just take that edge out. You can also use a dry brush like I did there and just swipe the whole thing and start again. It's really up to you what you like to do. This is called lifting off pigment, and it's a nice way to give yourself that cloud effect. Just adding a blue layer here, nice wash of blue over top, and you can see slowly but surely the colors are starting to build. Whee! Due to the magic of editing, here we are on day 3. And I'm adding another layer, another wash of this plum, because I really like how I'm starting to get that effect, but also, because I went over the lines. Now, this is something that I used to beat myself up about all the time. I'd get so stressed out that I went outside the line, but you know what? I kind of like that rough edge to it. The only thing that I noticed is that where I didn't get all the paint in, it left a bit of a line. So that's mostly why I was doing this. Now, if you like a nice clean line on your paintings, then the thing to do is get some painter's tape or washi tape and just draw it, the rectangle of your image, and then put paint tape around the edges. And that way you don't have to worry about it. But for me, I like playing around with it a little bit, and you'll see throughout the painting that things just kind of gradually get a little bigger. All right, here we are again on the next day. Things are dry. Now you see how the color has shifted a bit once it's dry? So I can see, oh, look, I've got the orange and the yellow. I've got a bit of the blue and the plum. And there's that line I'm not liking, so I'm going to go over it yet again. But you see that the colors are starting to build and create that luminosity and that depth, which from a distance really makes your eye feel like you are looking at something in the vista.
Putting it directly next to where the mountain peaks are, and then a bit of water over top so that it spreads out like that. It gives you that really nice effect of the light behind the mountains and how you have the shadow that goes up to the bright sun area. And so in leaving these areas here white, it really does make the eye see the bright yellow white of the sunset. And so what we're doing now is just continuing on, building up layers. And that's the beauty of watercolor. It does need a little patience. And this is what I would call the ugly stage, where everything you just like, what? How can this possibly look good? The edges are all weird and the colors don't match and I went off the line and I extended it. That's what I did. So if you do stuff like that, don't worry. It's okay. It's part of the process, and it's, you know, this is not about perfection. It's about creating something from joy that you really like to look at and enjoy it at a later time. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start to put some more layers on. This is going to continue to be unpainted, because always put the dark colors last. So what I've done is I've mixed up a little bit of this blue, the light blue there, and I'm making it quite watery, because what I'm going to do is put a wash over top of the orange and then let it dry. And I'm going to just sort of put in where I feel the clouds are, and then we're going to let it dry. And then after that, I'll probably go on with another layer of orange. That's where my clouds are going to be. And when this dries, you won't see much of a color shift. It'll be quite subtle. Okay, now we're going to move down to this section. And just to show you the reference photo that I've got in the background, it's quite orange. So now is time to start layering up, and we're going to put another level of orange on it. So this you can see is quite white, and in the picture, quite orange. I'm trying to do it without the, there we go. So this section here is what we're going to do. Try to color match and then just put a wash sort of all the way down. I'm doing quite a watery wash, a lot of water, a little bit of pigment, and there's a bit of orange, and I added a little bit of yellow just to brighten it up here. And this again, going to be a wash on the whole surface. So we're going to just do the whole thing, and you can see that it starts to brighten that up a bit, right? Now again, remember that when you do these watercolors, they're always going to dry a little bit darker than what you're seeing. And so as I go over the areas that are kind of blue, it's giving them a bit of a gray appearance. So there's some sections like this part here, I want it to stay quite blue. And down in here as well. So I'm not going to put the wash on all of the blue, just in some sections, but really up in here, just to get this color a little closer to the source photo. Now you can also begin to put in some more of these darker areas in the water. Just use the very tip of your brush. So you can see this one goes to quite a fine tip. And remember that the more pressure, the thicker the line. So you can just use your hand, go very light. And again, just layer by layer by layer, we are adding this visual interest in here. So you can see, remember what I was saying about don't adding the black. You see how the color has, because of this paper being very porous and it has a lot of texture, it's just naturally seeping in to the background. So we don't have to worry about that because she's going to be quite dark. So if that does happen, don't freak out. I remember when I first started watercoloring and I thought, oh my gosh, I've ruined the painting. But no, not at all. It's just an area that we're going to go over later. So here we are on day 3, and I've mixed up a bit of a darker blue. It's more of a lavender actually. And also, I mixed up a bit more orange, and this time I added a bit of punch to it. It's not as much water, and there's a little bit more pigment, so this should give us a better wash. So now that we've got things kind of laid out, and I'm just going to bring up the painting so you can see here where the clouds are starting to show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down another level, another wash. And so that it doesn't have a hard edge afterwards, I'm just going to very softly soften it with a little bit of water, and that will help the paint disperse and bleed. Similar to this effect, but much more subtle because we're not going to have as strong of a paint color. So let's zoom in. Whee! Okay. And and get some of that paint on the brush. Now I'm using a really beautiful brush that holds a lot of water. The more water it holds, the longer you can paint. It's basically the thing. And so you'll see that reflected in the price of brushes, but it doesn't mean that you need to go out and buy the most fancy brush. There's a lot of really good ones at a reasonable price. Okay, so what I'm going to do again is I'm going to just go in with this orange. I'm going to block the clouds right there. And I'm going to make sure that I've got quite a bit of pigment here so this doesn't dry. And that way I'm going to prevent any lines that are coming in. And I'm just going to take that wash right down into the sunset. Like that. Be careful of the areas that are white. You don't want to lose that white because those are your highlights of the sun just beginning to set. So we want to leave that so that the eye sees that as bright light. Okay, there we go. And now what I'm going to do is just wash my brush, and then I'm going to just take off any excess water and softly go along those edges. And you can see that it's just softening it up ever so slightly. And then there was also a little bit, I want to just kind of get in up into here a bit. And again, lots of water in the brush, lots of paint in the brush, I mean. And then there was sort of a bit of stippling. So I'm just going to leave, you can see this has got sort of a texture thing happening, and I'm going to leave that because that's kind of what we're seeing in the picture. And again, I'm going to put water on the brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of paper towel. Just going to take out the excess like that, and then just use the brush on the edges. And that way you get that nice effect. And so you can see it's not identical to the picture, but it's pretty close. And so your mind is looking at it and going, oh, I see clouds. And then if you don't like those sharp edges, again, just come in with that wet brush that has no pigment on it. Take those edges out. And the other thing you can do is to actually use a dry brush. And for instance, right here, I'm just going to put the dry brush there, and then you can soak up any extra paint or water, and that can also create a bit of effect there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, so I'm going to let that dry. Seeing now in the picture that there are quite a few areas that are light, and so we want to respect the light in the water, and we're not going to do the wash completely over everything, just going to take it over certain areas where we can see that the color needs to be enhanced a little. And now I'm going to move on to doing a little bit of texture in here. As you can see, let's bring the original photo here. In the original photo, you can see that there's quite a bit of texture happening in there, and also down in this area. Now, because this is already wet, if I put blue on here, what's going to happen? They're going to mix and it'll blend. And in some areas that's okay, but I also want the highlights. So I'm probably not going to do a full wash or cover everything. But let's just start up in that area. And again, that's this Daniel Smith sort of lavender color, and there was a little bit of orange left in the mixing tray, so it just gives it a little bit more depth. So there's a couple ways you can get texture. You can stipple it by doing that. You can use a relatively dry brush, meaning you don't have too much watercolor paint on the brush, and just stipple it in. You can use a textured brush, like old toothbrushes work really, really well for that. But because it's still a layer that's, you know, below everything, I'm just going to do like a stippling thing. And you can see that there's sort of a darker area right in here. And then I'm just going to, I see there's another darker area. All right, and then this area here is all stipply, so I'm just gonna ping pong that in a little bit, create a little bit of texture here. All right, so now I'm just gonna freeform and do a bunch of little lines in here that kind of represent where there's a bit of choppiness in the water. And again, kind of using this as a guide, the picture as a guide, but it doesn't have to be perfect. There's like a bunch of movement in here. And then some of these guys were a little bit darker. And now in here, there's a lot happening, so I'm gonna do that stippling thing again. Okay, so now we can see that we're really starting to, from a distance, get that feeling of the water. You can see sort of the reflection of the sun coming down through the center. And we're just getting a feeling of it having the solid mass of water. And that's because your eye is blending all of the different colors and textures together from a distance. And then when you come up close, you can see all of the work that we just did together, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna let that dry. And then I think I'm gonna do a final wash. Just want a little bit more blue in this area. In the picture, it's kind of a purpley, golden blue color, you see? So again, not an exact match, but more just because I want the depth, because right now that feels really washed out to me. So I'm gonna come back in with a little bit more blue, and then we're gonna let that dry and we'll go on to the next section. Okay, so I mixed up some orange, and this time I added a little extra yellow and a tiny little bit of red just to bump up the vibrancy of the color. And here we go. I'm just going to do a wash over the majority of everything. Now I'm not going to go through here because I feel like this color is pretty good right now. And you can see that already we're getting a bit of a much brighter saturated orange. Oh, that looks beautiful already.
Now, do you see the beauty of being patient and building up the layers? We are getting this incredible color, and we're going to start putting underneath the clouds a little bit more orange. And now you can see they're popping out. And one of those lovely little watercolor tricks is to put a bit of a darker shadow at the bottom, and it really does make it look like those clouds are on the horizon and they're just kind of rolling away. Gives that beautiful look. So there we go. One of my favorite parts. Things are just starting to come alive here.
Now we're gonna actually put in the shadows, and I'm gonna pull the source picture up again. And the shadows are not actually solid, so that you can see there's a bit of tone and color, but I don't want to get too fussy with it because I find that the water is already, there's a lot of detail there. So what I'm going to do is block in these two and then the little boy. And there's a subtle difference from the top to the bottoms on the two people. Very subtle. And I might do that just because it's a visual thing for the eye, you know, helps you look at it and gives it more depth. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today. Now, the other thing I did want to mention is, if you weren't aware, and I'm laughing at myself for not having said this earlier, when you are working with watercolor paper and graphite, as soon as you put the paint over the graphite, that's it, it's done. You can't erase it. So if you see anything that you don't want to be showing up, then this is the time to erase it. So I'm just going to go in and take out that excess that was in her bun. And I'm going to leave that part of the arm there as a guide just for myself later, because I'm going to go darker, and also the shirt. But I don't need to see this crosshatch, even though this is going to be quite dark and I might not. But just some extra little details that I've got on here. Okay, and then the little one, you can just see his shorts at the bottom and where his top goes. So we'll leave that. Okay, so I'm just gonna start to block it in. Now, because it's quite a dark shadow, I'm not going to worry about a lot of detail in here. I'm just gonna try and block her in a bit. The only place I'm seeing a bit of a change in color is between the top and the bottom. And that's naturally darker in their clothing, but also because of the way that the sun is going down. Now you can see where I've left this pencil line. I'm just going to go beside it, and I'm going to leave it like a white area, strangely enough, but then I will be coming back in with the darker color over top of that. So I'm just leaving that almost like a reminder. And then also she's got this phone or device that she's holding, and then there should be a little tiny gap there, which I missed with the orange paint, but I can come back into it. A tiny, tiny little gap there. Okay. There. Now she does also have glasses on, which I don't know if you'll be able to see that. Let's pull that all the way up there. You can see just right there, there's glasses. So I'm just going to put that in at the very end. I might even use just ink, just to make it a bit simpler for myself and not have to fuss too much. Okay, let's do this guy's hat. So we're going to leave those guys like that, and then I'll be doing the rest of this later. And now we're going to move on to the little one here. We're going to move into the filling in of the mountain range in the background, and which is actually one of the Gulf Islands. There is actually small hills in the front. So you can see it's a bit darker here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by putting that in as a basic line. It does, again, doesn't have to be perfect. You can do this whole thing solid if you'd like, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is sort of mark in this small mountain range. And really it's just at this point just getting some of these lines nice and straight. Now because of the way the ocean is and the waves and shadows are in the source photo, you can see it's not actually 100% straight, right? So again, with everything else as we're working through here, remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, your mind will probably be thinking, oh, I need to have it an absolutely perfect line. Well, if it doesn't work out that way, that's okay. You know, the point of this is just to give yourself a little bit of a break and enjoy this for the process and not a stressed out thing. So I'm just going to, you know, lightly bloobity bloob it in. And you can see that's not perfect. And that's not exactly what is showing. And then what I'm going to do, because I'm finding this angle challenging to work with, is I'm going to turn my painting around. So if you ever find that things are not feeling comfortable in your hand, turn it around. No one says you have to have it up and down all the time. I know it makes a better video, but harder for me to paint. So also wanted to share that with you. Okay, so I'm just going to fill this in. And turn that around so you can see what I've done. Okay, and so I'm going to let that dry, and then what we're going to do is we're going to come back with another wash. And a really great tip for creating depth and making things look like they're far away, especially when you've got, these are actually islands, but mountains, is to go darker then gradually lighter. I'm sure you've seen all those posters that have been around for years and years where you have that beautiful misty tree scene and you have the trees in the front and the mountains, and it just progressively gets lighter as it goes backwards. And that's what creates that sensation of depth. So while I've put this in a lighter color, This is just a guideline for me at this point, and I can go over that again, and then I will do the same thing with the mountains in the back. So we are going to let that dry up and be back in a minute. So I decided I wanted to add, because this is local to me, I wanted to actually add the mountain that is here, or the little island that is here. So I'm just gonna plunk that on. And I've gone back to using this original purple, which is this one here, which is this plum, purpley plum, right out of the tray. And you can see already, right, the depth, just having the two colors, right? Your eye will blend it all together, but it will create a sensation of depth. Okay, now we can see the sun has come out, things have dried up, get a little bit more sense of the color. That's looking pretty good. And now I'm gonna block in the log and the sand. And these purples will actually serve as an under layer to more of a blue-gray color, but with that bit of hint of plum. So similar to what we're seeing up here, without using a blue on top of purple. So what I'm going to use next is a very popular color. You can get this in any brand. This is Paynes gray, and it is a like a blue-gray color, and it's really pretty. So again, I'm going to just show you the source photo, and on the source photo down here, we can see that this part here is a little bit lighter. So it's just sort of showing you where the beginning of the sand is, and then it's getting darker as it comes towards us. So we're going to just mimic that. And I'm going to block in this part darker, and then I'm going to put a water wash and bring the color a little bit lighter as we go up. See, that's turned out quite nicely. It's doing a bit of an ombre effect, and I'm just going to leave that to dry. And what I am going to do is I'm going to go back up into here and just put a darker line of the Paynes gray just right at the base. Right, so now we're going to let that dry. Our favorite thing to do with this one. Lots of drying time. This is exciting. We're getting close to the end. Now we're going to do this log, that nice Paynes gray color. And I'm just going to, because this is probably one of the darkest parts of the painting, I'm just going to put it in straight up. Like that. So you see, I just got my brush quite wet. And then just come in here and I'm just pushing the pigment over, and it creates that sort of end of the log kind of situation happening here. I'm just going to block some darker color in, and there you go. And I feel like that's a little bit too light in there. We want this quite dark. And just really get that quite dark down here at the bottom. Okay. Now the other thing is with the sand, you're going to get a little bit of a highlighter right just before the water. So I'm going to bring the darker color and then leave that. It's very similar to what we were getting up on the horizon line here, this type of thing. All right, now this is dried, so I'm going to come in one last layer in here. Beautiful. The next step is to do the texture in the water. At this point, if you're happy with it, you are good to go. If you want to add a little more depth and a little more shadow, which I might do, I'm going to put a lighter wash of the Paynes gray over these guys, I think. They're just a little too plum for me, I'm feeling. But I love the purple and the orange back here, so I'm going to probably leave that. And here we are on day 5, the last day. A little bit of snow. Lighting is perfect for painting, and look how beautiful this dried. So at this point, you're probably looking at your painting as well and saying, wow, that looks really incredible.
And you might be happy to stop, or you might want to continue on like I'm going to, and just put some finishing details. Now, as I've been saying, as we've been working on it, I wanted to show a very subtle difference in the two tones between the top and bottom of the parents here, and then the child. And the only thing that I'm not liking is that there is quite a difference in color between the bluish gray and the purple. So what I'm going to do is put a very light wash of the Paynes gray over top, just to bring those tonal ranges into the same visual area. And I think that'll just finish it off nicely. The mountains, however, I love how they look with the purple. So I'm not going to touch them. I think they look great. The purple and the orange are wonderful colors that bounce off of each other, and I think that looks super. And even with the little bloobs that I made on the bottom, remember I was saying don't worry about it? It just kind of looks like a reflection, doesn't it? So I'm going to leave it. Happy accidents, right? Okay, and really what I'm going to do today is just get in here a little bit, put a little bit of detail, and that's pretty much it. And then our wonderful sunset painting is done, and we can share it with our friends and family and hang it up in the house. So let's get started with this today and finish it off. Okay, so you can see that I made quite a sheer wash with the Paynes gray, and I'm just going to lightly cover these figures. I'm feeling like this has got a bit too much of a demarcation here, so I'm going to actually go in there again with the wash, but I'm going to add some pigment to the wash, and just so that I don't get any streaky weird lines or buckling, because this paper is a nice paper, but any paper that has too much water is going to buckle. So I'm just going to make sure I get most of that area covered. And then as a finishing touch, what I'm going to do is just put a tiny line here right at the seashore. And by tiny, I mean, look how tiny that is. That's a 400 or a 40 brush. If you don't have one, don't worry. You can even use a pencil crayon or a marker, or not do it at all. Really just depends on how you like to work. I'm fussy, so I know that. So I'm going to go in and do this, and then if I'm not happy, I can always blot it out. Okay, here we are at the end of the painting, and it's looking pretty great. We're just going to put the absolute finishing touches, and that would be to add some of these details in the water. And so I am actually going to use a couple different shades of orange that came with the set. I'm going to use them right out of the palette, this one and this one. And then also I have some leftover of the dark purple. It looks super black here, but that's actually this color here. I'll use that up in the blue area. Okay, so we're just gonna zoom in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to get a little bit of water on the paint. And if you've never used these before, this Kuretaki Gansai set, they're very interesting because they're halfway between watercolor and gouache. And gouache is more almost acrylic-like in its opacity. So these are more like a semi-opaque, and they don't need as much water to sort of activate the paints. And I find that they are quite opaque. So what I'm gonna do is be very sparing in the way that I'm going. And that's why I'm starting with a lighter orange. Again, if you're not 100% comfortable, create yourself just a little thing like that and you can see. So this is what it's like dried. And I put it down a little bit wet and you can see, yeah, that looks very similar to some of the areas in the painting that have the waves. So this zone here, right? And here we go, the finished painting. Now, for me, this took 5 days, but for you, it might have been a nice afternoon. And the whole point of it is not to have it look perfect, but to be perfect for you. And we can see we've got this nice even color with the purples and plums of the silhouettes against the orange sunset and the lovely purple mountains in the background. And I'm quite pleased how that turned out for me. How did yours turn out? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, or if you have any questions. Please do like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. And thank you so much for hanging out with me for this painting today.